What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thanks for checking us out. My name is GemmaJade, but today we are going to be talking about a possible time slip in Canada. One of the strangest and most fascinating things, at least in my opinion, that's talked about at length in the paranormal community is the event of time slips. It's something we've talked about here on this channel many times and throughout and across many videos. In fact, it's something I would talk about every other week if there were enough reliable reports and information about them out there. I love these stories so much, and all the more because each and every one I bring to you and discuss with you all here on this channel, I absolutely really believe happened. Time slips could be summed up as instances where a person or group of people seem to have passed through some sort of veil between time and space, and sometimes even between worlds and realms. Not always, but most of the time they find themselves having gone back in time to bear witness to some event or seemingly some random events happening there before being catapulted back and returned to the present, completely confused and totally unable to explain or process what in the world just happened to them, where they'd gone, and why. Cases of people experiencing time slips are somewhat rare, and it's still not a widely accepted idea in the community or for most people at large. However, when they do happen, they're always incredibly bizarre and mostly nonsensical, but interesting to say the very least, and nonetheless. Today, I want to focus on one time slip in particular that happens a long time ago, back in the 19th century, on the frontiers of Canada, and trust me, I do not think you will be disappointed when it's all said and done, so let's jump right in. Sir Cecil Edward Denny emigrated from England to the United States when he was only 19 years old, and in 1874 he joined Canada's Northwest Mounted Police, where he quickly rose through the ranks and worked his way up from constable to sub-inspector. He took part in what's known as, quote, the Long March West, end quote, and he kept a journal and took notes on the many things he saw and experienced while on that journey and while a part of the Mounties in general. He had many adventures while marching through this wild and untamed land of wilderness and oddities, and there's even a book written either by him personally or with the information being taken directly from his notes. The information in all of my source material was sketchy as to the fact of whether or not he wrote the book or someone using his name wrote it. Either way, they're Cecil's experiences, written in his own words. The book is called The Riders of the Plains, a reminiscence of the early and exciting days of the Northwest. Let's start this off with a quote from that book. The author said, quote, for some years after the advent of the Northwest Mounted Police into the western portion of the then Prince Rupert's Island and today known as the Northwest Territories, the newness and also the strangeness of the country were a source of unfailing interest to us who belonged to that force. Game of all kinds abounded throughout the country, and as we came to the foothills of the Rockies, bear, elk, and moose were often to be seen. This class of game was little molested by the tribe of Blackfeet Indians, whose home was out on the plains and who lived together on the buffalo, which animals supplied them not only with meat, but nearly everything, either directly or indirectly, that they required. The streams were full of fish of many kinds, trout being the most plentiful, and near the mountains, salmon trout, which often weighed 15 to 18 pounds, were easily caught, end quote. Interesting, and a great way to set the scene for the experience he was about to have that brought us all together here today. During his travels, Cecil spent a lot of time with the local Blackfoot tribe, and the whole unit had a lot of contact with them. The Blackfoot were very friendly and inviting to the troops, and they were overall just generally nice and welcoming people. Members of the tribe would go hunting and fishing with the men, and Cecil's writings are filled with tons of information and detailed accounts about not only the time they all spent together, but of the tribe's life and culture, their everyday way of living, which was fascinating. In fact, Cecil Denny's writings are among some of the more detailed writings out there about the Blackfoot people and animals on the land at that time. Many of the writings about the Blackfoot in particular almost jump up off the page at you because they seem so strange and bizarre, and that's exactly something we're here to discuss today. It appears as though Cecil Denny came across some sort of bizarre time slip out there in the Canadian wilderness, and as soon as I learned of that, I was here for it. It was the summer of 1875, and Cecil had gone on a trip for the purposes of mainly fishing and hunting, and it took him from the fort of Old Man River to the foothills of the mountains and then up that river again about 40 miles. He had with him a pack of horses, cooking utensils, blankets, an inflatable Indian rubber boat, and many other things, and he had with him a native tribesman who was acting like sort of a guide for him. The guide was also there to help him if he should have bagged some animals that were perhaps too much for one man to deal with, let alone carry all the way back. Think about it. The fish weighed up to 18 pounds. Think about the animals. The guide also brought along 2 spare horses. Both Cecil and his guide thought the trip would be a lot of fun and that it would be fruitful, with neither one of them nor anyone else having any reason to think that anything strange would happen to them at all. That was the case for the first day, but once the second day started, things definitely took a turn for the weird. The 2 men ran into some trouble when a very threatening storm seemingly sprung up out of nowhere. I'll let Cecil's words take it from here. Quote, on the following morning, we packed the deer and our camp outfit on the 2 spare horses, and the Indian made an early start with them for the fort. I remained with the boat ready to go down by the river, keeping only my gun in a light overcoat with a bite of cold meat and bread for lunch. I made a good way down the river during the morning, which was fine and warm, only once having any trouble at a rather nasty rapid, in the middle of which I stuck on a flat rock. In getting off, the boat upset, and I got a thorough ducking before I could catch it again. So we went underwater. The gun, which was fastened by a cord to the side of the cushion, was not lost, although rendered useless for the time by water. I, therefore, camped early for dinner, eating the bread and meat, which, although rather sodden, was better than nothing. I got my clothes partially dried in the sun. All my matches were wet, and a fire was not to be had. While camped about noon, the weather began to look threatening, heavy banks of clouds gathering in the north, and now and then the growl of thunder in the distance could be heard. As I was not more than halfway, I started going again on my downward journey as soon as possible, but the farther I went, the darker it grew, and as soon as I saw I was in for a heavy storm, which, to say the least, was by no means pleasant, I was worried. The thunderstorms along the mountains, although seldom of long duration, were often very severe while they lasted, and by the look of things, I was in for one of the worst. I, however, made my way steadily down the river, and after a while the storm came down with a vengeance. There was a heavy wind with hail, rain, and perpetual lightning, followed by deafening peals of thunder, seemingly right overhead. I found it difficult with such a light boat to make any progress, as the heavy wind would drive me from one shore to the other, and the river was lashed into quite heavy waves, so that, although the boat could not sink, I was sitting in water up to my waist, and sometimes sheets of water would be blown right over me. As it was getting quite dark, although not more than 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I found it impossible to make my way, and I was determined to land and wait until the storm was over." End quote. Cecil managed to make it to the shore and to take cover from the severe weather, and he took shelter in a stand of trees. Just as he went and took that cover in those trees, there seemed to be somewhat of a lull in the storm that just seconds before had been thundering towards him in a hurry and in a fury. The lull was just enough for him to be able to make out the sound of drums thumping and beating and the sounds of very loud chanting. These sounds broke through the rain and crashing thunder. Cecil considered that the natives in the area were friendly and decided to secure his boat and make his way towards the sounds he'd been hearing, because he figured it was a native camp and he could probably make some friends, find better shelter, and possibly get some food from there. As he made his way towards the camp, the sounds of the drumming and chanting became louder, and so he figured he was coming closer and closer to it and off in the right direction. As he was walking, though, the storm became more severe and intense than before, and lightning was ominously flashing across the sky, with the rumble of thunder shaking the earth beneath his feet. Cecil was scared, but he made it within sight of the camp. He said of what happened next, quote, "The storm had now come down worse than ever, and the lightning was almost blinding. I made my way through the timber as fast as possible, it not being any too safe in such close proximity to the trees, and coming out into an open glade of quite an extent, I saw before me the Indian camp not more than 200 yards away. I could see men and women and even children moving about among the lodges, and what struck me as strange was the fact that the fires in the center of many of the tents shone through the entrances, which were open. This surprised me, as you do not often find the Indians moving about in the wet if they can help it. They generally keep their lodges well closed during a thunderstorm, of which they are very, very much afraid. They look upon thunder as being the noise made by one of their deities, called the Old Man, while throwing great boulders from the mountains. There were, I should consider, about 20 lodges in the camp, and a band of horses could be seen grazing not far off on the other side of the camp. I stood for a few seconds watching and considering which lodge to make for, and had taken a few steps toward the one nearest me, when I seemed to be surrounded by a blaze of lightning, and at the same time a crash of thunder followed that fairly stunned me for a minute and sent me on my back. A large tree not far off was struck. I could hear the rending of the wood, and it was afterwards found nearly riven in half. Some of the electric fluid had partly stunned and thrown me down. I was fortunate to have escaped with my life, and, as it was a few minutes before I was able to rise and look around. I looked towards the place where the camp stood, but to my unutterable astonishments as well as terror, it was not there." It was quite light, although still storming heavily, and was not much after 4 o'clock. A few minutes before, not only a large Indian camp had stood there, and the voices of the Indians could be distinctly heard, but now all had suddenly disappeared, even to the band of horses that were quietly grazing there only a few moments before. I stood for a moment almost dumb with astonishment, seeing and hearing nothing, when suddenly an overwhelming sense of terror seemed to seize me, and almost without knowing what I did, I took off running towards the bank overlooking the river, which was about a quarter of a mile away, dropping my gun as I ran. I did not stop until I reached the top of the bank, and there I had to rest for want of breath. Here I managed to gather my wits together and to think of what had just taken place. The open place where the camp had stood was in plain sight from where I was, with the clump of trees being towards the river, but it was empty, and not a tent or human being in sight. There was nothing but the trees tossed by the storm and the driving rain, and now and then a flash of lightning. I could even then hardly believe my eyes, but there was no doubt about it, and I did not remain long in sight of that spot, and being afraid to go down to my boat, I decided to walk down the riverbank to the fort, which must have been a good 15 miles away. It was one of the hardest journeys I ever undertook in my life. What with the shock from being thrown down, and then the most astonishing and inexplicable disappearance of the camp, and also being soaked to the skin, I was in a most uncomfortable condition. The storm continued until night, when it cleared up, and I made my way into the fort at about midnight, completely tapped out, turning into bed at once, with no explanation of anything to anyone." End quote. The next morning, he told some of the other officers what he'd seen during the storm, but they all laughed at him, and no one believed him. He was either accused of making it all up or told he'd been hallucinating, but he knew what he'd seen was real, even if he didn't know how to explain what it was. Cecil decided to travel all the way back to the spot where the camp had been in the first place, and he took one of the natives and a Blackfoot interpreter with him. They found the spot relatively quickly, mainly because it was hard to miss due to the bend in the river and the rock formations nearby to it. An eerie silence met them as they all saw plainly that there was no camp there. Not only that, but there was no evidence there had ever been one there in the first place. Cecil wrote about what they found, and he said about it, quote, "We found the place without trouble, but it was vacant, and as we could see, no sign of any recent camp was to be seen. A few rings of stone partly overgrown and grass showed where an old camp had been many years ago, and on questioning the Indian, he stated that the Blackfeet had surprised and slaughtered a camp of Cree Indians at that very place many years ago, and in fact, we came across 2 bleached skulls lying there in the grass. The Indian did not seem to have any superstitions regarding the place. We found where a tree had been struck by lightning, and the boat and gun were brought away. I have until now but seldom mentioned this circumstance, but I am today as firmly convinced as ever that the Indian camp, together with the men, women, and horses, was most certainly there, and that I suffered under no hallucination whatsoever, but account for it I cannot, and look upon it as one of those inexplicable riddles which cannot ever be solved." End quote. It's possible he was somehow transported through some portal or some time slip, but I'm also wondering personally if Cecil was some sort of sensitive, like a medium or some other kind of seer, and if that isn't what happened and why he saw all he did that night. Maybe the strike of lightning. Lightning strikes do tend to activate people's abilities when they survive them. It's like an 8 times out of 10 thing. Someone gets struck by lightning, even like he did, just like a little bit, if that makes sense. Where they're not fully struck, but the ground near them or something, and they kind of get the offshoot, and then suddenly they have these extrasensory abilities. No, they've always had them. It's just the lightning, the electricity activates those things in their body somehow. I don't know how to explain it, but it is true. Either way, it remains a complete mystery. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you all think about it in the comments below, because that's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love, please, by sharing this video. I am still crawling, and I really want to be running to the race to 10K. If you're still with me this far, leave a purple heart in the comment. I noticed last week when I asked y'all to do that, only 4 people did it, and I had way more views than 4, which means a lot of people are not listening to my little spiel here at the end where I kind of self-promote, and I have to do that in order to gain followers, put people on to other things that I do and ways that I make money to support myself, because this is my job, guys. This is work. Whether you agree with my political and religious stances, of which I'm very vocal on TikTok, I have done my very best, aside from some shorts here and there, trying to be funny, made people smile and laugh. I've done my best to keep YouTube paranormal, and I would appreciate you guys respecting that. If you want to talk politics and religion, go on over to my TikTok, follow me. It's just me being me. I'm trying to find my way after all these years on YouTube and still kind of stunted. And I need you guys to help. Hype the video if you can. In the description box, you will find links for all 14 of my books on Kindle, paperback, and Audible. If you can't find a link you're looking for or just want to browse my entire collection, go to Amazon, type in Gemma Jade Books for any and all correspondence, information about personal readings, birth chart readings, services I offer, other products that I sell, any and all correspondence, to send in your own encounters with the supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial, otherworldly for my listener encounter series and or a future book. Any and all correspondence. I do not check PMs, DMs, Facebook messages, TikTok messages, Instagram messages. Like, I only check my emails unless you have my phone number and can text me. Most of you don't. So email me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com for any and all correspondence. Please hype this video. Join me on other social media platforms. Donate if you can. The link for my PayPal and Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link, which is under construction, but there's still some things on there. Guys, it is how I get paid to be able to keep moving forward and giving you all the content that you like over here. I've got to buy equipment. I've got to pay for editing. I've got to pay for StreamYard to go live. I've got to pay for everything that I put into these videos, not to mention just trying to make a living. And I don't want to harp on that. Most of you guys already know this. So leave a purple heart if you're still here. Donate, please, if you can. PayPal, Cash App, Amazon wish list gift link. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing, you're wonderful, you got this. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Got lots of energy today. Woohoo.